I split my time between here and the UK or elsewhere in Europe. Obviously, work stuff and whatever. But I live here. More or less. Some of my friends describe me as the most Brazilian gringo that they know.
What does that entail exactly?
It's just that certain things that some of my friends, certain things that they find quite mundane about living here, still really excite me. The basic sensations of sitting on a yellow plastic table outside a dank tiled bar in a street corner, having a ridiculously cold beer, things like that still appeal to me, So it was in those circumstances I learned Portuguese, actually.
I basically hit an emotional wall with work toward the end of last year. It was all this stuff like building up during the pandemic, and I finally just had to take a couple weeks off. And last minute, I found a cheap flight to Aruba, so I flew down there and spent a few days down there. And it's just this.
Oh, nice!
I'm a pretty fair or pale person, and and I live in New York City. I don't get a ton of sun, and it's a very obvious thing where people tell you, oh, the sun is good for you and it will improve your mood. And you're like, yeah. And then you go there and actually like sit in the sun for a few days. And it's like, oh yeah, no, this is actually having like a very tangible effect on my physiology and mood.
It's so simple, isn't it? It's so simple. And growing up in Northern Europe, actually, I never take it for granted. It's like here, most people I know, they'd be avoiding the sun if they could. The idea of sitting out in the street and stepping out of the shade, actually inviting the sun, it's completely alien. Everyone's trying to get out of it. But for me, I still feel, after 10 years, I still feel like I'm on holiday. I'm always going to chase after that. I see basic things. I mean, people would say this, oh yeah, just go away, get some sun or whatever, and you're like, yeah, whatever, and it's miraculous. I mean, that's as I say, especially coming from the north of England. I mean, for me, this is always going to feel like a vacation in Spain in the 1980s, no matter how long I stay here.
It's that thing of realizing that there are, millions of years of human evolution that adapted us.
It's worth listening. Yeah. It's worth listening to your grandparents about certain things. They might know about stuff. Yeah.
What brought you down there originally?
Oh, my partner's from here. So I actually lived in Italy for about 5 years prior to that. But it was always the plan to come down here and make base here eventually. So it's literally just 10 years since I arrived.
When you were younger and growing up did you grow up in Liverpool? Is that right?
Yeah. So born in Liverpool, grew up there. But it's funny. I realized the other day, because I went back there for Christmas, and I realized that for much of the last 20 years, I haven't actually lived there. For most of the last 20 years, I've either been traveling on tour or living in Italy or living in Brazil. But, it changes quickly. But, most of my old friends are still there. It's still home.
I get the feeling, and this is all basically gleaned from, the many, many bands that have come from that city specifically, that maybe it's something sort of akin to what in the US we would call the Rust Belt, cities like Detroit or Pittsburgh that are very working class and very kind of industry centric. Yeah,
it's probably similar. It's a city that doesn't let you go, and I think it's like those cities, like music cities, like Detroit. Even though we made music that wasn't necessarily associated with Liverpool, even though there was a rich tradition of the kind of thing we were doing going back to the late 70s. It's still hugely advantageous to be from Liverpool if you're doing music. I mean, it's one of the few cities in Britain where, you know, eyes light up when they hear the word Liverpool, you know, anywhere in the world because of its music history. So there's a definite advantage to it, and educationally as well. I mean, growing up there, you know, being kind of a kid on the music scene and having all this wisdom, then all this kind of oral tradition, you know, pre-internet musical discovery was a real head start, because it's a very small city actually, but it's there's a lot of culture compressed into a small space, and it's a port, so it's right up to the edge of the water. So it has like half the catchment area of a comparable city like Manchester, which is only 45 minutes away. But there's something about Liverpool. It's about its influence. It was the main contact point with the New World. You know, it was. I mean, a massive amount. I read a insane statistic about how much of North American emigration to the Americas actually went through Liverpool at some point. Like, you would come from Germany or wherever else, and you would stop in Liverpool en route, and then vice versa. We got all the records first. We got, you know, rock and roll first. We got ska first. We got all this stuff came in via the port.
I've not heard the ska thing. I mean, I know obviously, knowing what I know, how big of a presence it had in the 60s and obviously the 70s, but is it the same connection as far as the West Indies? It's that same port connection? Yeah,
the oldest communities, or some of the oldest communities in Britain. It was there was a hell of a lot. I mean, this is the kind of untold. I guess it is told now, but it wasn't for a long time. Like the music and the bands that were actually influencing the Beatles, they were from the West Indian community. They were from Toxteth, and this this had a huge effect on not on the city's perspective as well. It's worldview. And then, I mean, through that, with the success of the Beatles and everything, I was talking to how this put Liverpool on the map, not just for music, for film, television, actors. A lot of people got their breaks. Authors, a lot of people got their breaks because of the Beatles, just because it was on the map. But at the same time, beyond that, I mean, my bandmate Mira, like, she grew up in Bulgaria, and her parents said that the Beatles, like Beatles albums, if you were in Eastern Europe or somewhere else in the world, the people in Brazil have said similar, that basically the Beatles were the internet of their day. It was more or less the bridge. It was the conduit to discovery of anything, even non-musical things.
The huge bands coming out of there, extend beyond all the Mersey beat stuff. Mm-hmm. Echo and the Bunnymen is kind of the big one that jumps to mind as far as the 80s. But is there, whether in the 90s, whether 30 years later or, now, however many years that's been, is there a sense in which the Beatles still kind of loom large over the city?
Well, they do, because it's a huge industry. It's a tourist business. It's massive. I mean, a big bulk of the tourism of the city is based on that. Perhaps slightly less so now, but it does loom. But it just became music that you didn't have to listen to anymore. I remember concluding in my adolescence, I didn't actually have to put a Beatles record on. You had it all already up there. But in the scene that came in the late 70s around Eric's club, the scene that produced Echo and the Bunnymen, Teardrop Explodes, Big in Japan, and then Pink Military, Pink Industry, Dalek Eye, Wild Swans, all of this. They actually, the guy who ran that club, Roger Eagle, who was the DJ there. He told all the bands, the last thing you should do is listen to the Beatles. Just don't listen to the Beatles at all. If you do, you're going to be completely fucked. That it would somehow just pollute, their vision would be completely polluted, and they just end up sounding like the same as everyone else. So Jane Casey from Big in Japan and Pink Industry told me that. I actually joined Pink Industry. They reformed about 10 years ago. So I'm a guest member of that group. I mean, to be honest, when I first started hanging out in Liverpool, it was still all people from that scene, and I probably feel more connected to that scene, even though I was quite a bit younger and too young to have ever been there. I feel more connected to that than anything that happened since in the city, to be honest. Having said that, it did produce some amazing records that were aside from this. It produced the Lars album in 1990, which was incredible. It still sounds incredible, even though the band themselves didn't think so. And then Liverpool had a big pop cultural moment in the 90s around the Cream nightclub. So there was Scouse House. We had our own genre of dance music, and that was blaring out of every single bar or club in the city centre, from the mid-90s. And to be honest, that's what Ladytron was formed within. I mean, we built a little studio in the city centre, and we were sandwiched between these other project studios that were making Scouse House. And that influence, even though this wasn't our bag, we did underground parties. We were very much more coming from this, this scene, Stereolab and things like this. But the Scouse House actually had an influence on. I think it made us more disco. Actually, it just seeped through the walls by osmosis into our early productions and made us a lot more disco than we might have expected to be. And in that 1998, I mean, my friends who were going to Cream every week then, I mean, they describe it as a cultural high point, and I guess in Liverpool it might have been.
It sounds like you were able to find some real kinship with some of the music that was bubbling up at the time. I mean, you named Stereolab specifically.
Yeah, I mean, they were one of my favorites when I was still at school. They were, it's one of the, you have bands that you're into and they come and go, and they're one of the few that I never stopped loving,
Yeah, and they never really stopped either.
No. No, I mean, this is what I mean. We came from more of this kind of this underground DIY lo-fi thing. The instrumentation we were using, it wasn't fetishized. We basically just bought cheap keyboards, organs, monosynths, things that we would find at flea markets for very little money compared to what it costs now. You're talking about picking up things that cost, I'll give you £20 for this keyboard, things like that, things that cost thousands now. So we were really just using the instruments we had available more in that spirit than, because I think some people expected us to be, or they interpreted us or wanted us to be some kind of early 80s revival band, or something, but we were never that, really, to be honest. There was always punk in what we did. So
buying those flea market synths and instruments, that was less an aesthetic choice and more just a product of, I guess, your financial situation at the time.
Yeah, both. I mean, even though it did have aesthetic appeal, often we would get keyboards and we didn't know what they did. We didn't know what they sounded like. It just looked the part, and we said, "Oh, well, that's worth a try." It's not like now that there's a collector's market for this stuff. But having said that, the record we were aiming for the kind of things that we heard on records we loved. We just didn't know exactly how to get there. There was a really unique shop in Liverpool called the Keyboard Corporation at that time as well. I to be honest, I seemed like the only customer. I was the only person ever in there, and I rarely bought anything. but they closed down at some point, and I was walking past and I saw the owner like waving to me furiously, and I went in and he said, we're going, basically take what you want. So because I'd been such a loyal non-paying customer, he gave me some keyboards when they shut down, that are still in use to this day, actually.
I know that when the band was really forming, you were, I believe, a pretty active DJ at the time. What was your musical background as far as, I guess, as far as actually making music on instruments?
It was self-taught, trial by error. The most important thing was, because I was DJing every week, sometimes a couple of times a week. I don't even understand how I did it, to be honest, now. But a lot of, because there was this huge dance scene going on in Liverpool, and elsewhere, of course, but Liverpool was really the fulcrum of it at that point. But we were doing underground parties. It was more of a, indie alternative thing. We played we had like Northern Soul and psych rock parties and things like that. So I was playing records like this, which was itself just an informal musical education. So a lot of the musical ideas that were the instincts that were flowing into at least the early stuff, and even to now, it wasn't necessarily coming from the records that we were associated with. It was more, okay, there's this Northern Soul tune, just giving me an idea. I'm going to run over to the studio now and record it on these plinky plonky keyboards that we picked up from a flea market. And then the end result was what became our first album.
There's a big extent to which the way something ends up sounding on record is a product of the tools that you have in front of you. It's basically physically impossible to do something that sounds one of those classic soul records from the 60s on, again, a thrift store keyboard.
Yeah, exactly. And the end result sounds like something that is disassociated from either. And one thing that was very important, it would, again, kind of accidental, but we never had demos. The idea of, we've recorded a demo. I mean, and this was more associated with, traditional guitar bands or whatever, but you would record a demo and then you would go in the studio and record it properly. But there was that process was completely streamlined with us. It was like, you record it, that's the track. You might add to it, but that's it. There's no dislocation. Because, the classic thing of demoitis, having some great version of a track. So we've got to go back in again and do it. We never had that, thankfully. It was just, we've done this. No, actually, I'm going to stick something else on it. Okay, fine. But we never had demos. So what came out was as close to the original idea as possible, basically.
The more modern analog to that is almost the tyranny of choice that you get with something like Pro Tools, where you could spend, a week working on, one drum track and just sort of end up completely gutting the humanity out of a song.
Yeah, this is a problem as well, because we didn't have it because we didn't know. We were self-taught. We didn't know half the features that the DAW software had. So we were using it in a very rudimentary way, and all those that as you say, this tyranny of choice didn't really reveal itself to us. To some extent now, but not back then. So we never had that problem. A lot of people around us, other people in Liverpool and some other producers in Europe and that were friends with us, closest at the time, I detected that they had this huge problem in finishing music. It was finishing albums, deciding something that is self-produced, deciding that it's actually finished and ready, incredibly difficult. And I saw people spend years, literally years and years with what sounded like a finished record to me. And only under huge external pressure would they end up conceding that it was ready and be forced to release it. At which point they might have missed their moment, yeah, the democratization of recording did introduce a whole swathe of new problems. You've self-discipline.
At this point in the process, whether it's the Ladytron stuff or the myriad bands that you've collaborated with or produced, is how similar is your current process to that one that you almost kind of cobbled together in the early days?
It's not that different. It's just that the learning curve is obviously gone. But it's not really that different, to be honest. A lot of the time, there's been a temptation to shift, the methodology to something more, I don't know, more compatible with if you go in the studio to mix or whatever, and everyone has a very standard setup, and you have to adapt to that to a certain point. So it's crossed my mind at various times. Well, if we worked like that at the beginning, would we be saving time and effort later? But then, as soon as you start getting on with a new project, you haven't got time to learn something else. So we more or less stayed in the same, more or less the same methods, just with faster machines and more of our toys around us.
The four of you having worked together for as long as you have, that you're all very comfortable with one another, and you're all very familiar with each other's processes. But when you're getting into the studio with somebody else, when you're producing someone else, there's an extent to which you have to adapt to their workflow.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. So this would be, working with other people would definitely be more of an adaptation. In the recording if not in the writing process, but you can't. Everything, as you say, everything's standardized on Pro Tools. If you turn up with anything other than Pro Tools and expect to be working on it in the studio, it's just
you show up with your 4-track Tascam.
Yeah. Hey guys, this works. Yeah, I know. So to some extent, you're right. You do have to adapt subliminally, at least. But yeah, I've had some very good experiences. My rule is that I don't work with other artists unless there is a rapport there, and unless I think that we can do something amazing. So I'm really quite choosy. So I did a Lush record when they did their little comeback. I love doing that. Not least because they were one of my favorite bands when I was younger. I did quite a bit of work with a singer down in Sao Paulo called Leah Paris. I've done about 5 tracks with her, which is kind of in the realm of Ladytron, but her voice is very different. Yeah, there's very, very, very picky. You know what it has to feel like? It has to feel like we're in a band together. I know a producer-band relationship wouldn't work.
What does it mean to have a rapport with someone in this context?
Well, just in terms of knowing the people beforehand, already understanding them, already knowing their humor, knowing that the kind of creative ideas that you're going to put in are going to be mutually appreciated. This kind of thing, just ultimately like friendship. But obviously, when you start working together, it's not necessarily friendship yet.
Sometimes it turns out to be quite the opposite.
Yeah, it hasn't gone the other way, thankfully for me. Not yet.
At what point in the process was it clear that the rapport was there with Ladytron?
Well, the whole thing at the beginning was it's such a blur, because I felt like things accelerated we started getting some traction when we didn't really expect it. And it was, you know, we were not necessarily ready for it. We had to really learn on our feet. So there wasn't a lot of time. there wasn't a lot of time to get to know each other that well, to be honest. But we did, and we were this little gang. We were just, we were just kids, having fun and feeling like anything was possible. I mean, I think about those early shows we did and whatever. It was, just jumping on a plane and going to Berlin and doing a gig in an abandoned bank, or going to Paris and playing in a bowling alley, like on a bowling alley in a metro station. And this whole time we were just having these little adventures like this, and we were obviously bonding through them. At the same time, we never bothered going to play in London or anything boring like that. And I think that the industry actually it was anything the industry actually expected us to do, all these things, these rites of passage. We just completely bypassed them, just ignored them. I don't think we played a proper headline show in London until the first album was already released. We just, there was a certain, maybe just on my part, but certain provincial chip on shoulder antipathy towards London, perhaps had a part in that. But mainly it's just because we had better things to do. Oh no, someone's just going to buy our flights and we're going to go and play Barcelona. Sure, let's go and do that. Rather than going down to London in a van and playing some back room of a pub to 5 people. So we skipped all that phase, and I think it only benefited us ultimately.
There are obviously different levels of glamour. Again, as you said, playing in the back of a pub in London obviously isn't the same as playing a huge, beautiful venue there, but it's not as though playing a bowling alley in Germany is an especially glamorous experience either.
No, not glamour. It definitely wasn't glamour, but it just felt these were just adventures, and also it was so much more educational. If we went to Germany or Spain or France at that point, late 90s, and you're still really talking about pre-internet in terms of music, you would learn so much. You would come back with so many records. You would meet like fellow traveler producers. To be honest, everywhere we went, there was already a Ladytron there. The way in the Asterix cartoon where there's like the kind of the different village, and they go there and it's almost exactly the same. There's a bard and there's the big Obelix guy, and everything's almost identical. It was like we found that was everywhere. Everywhere we went, they seemed to have their own Ladytron already, and everyone thought that they were the only people doing it in the world at that point. Ourselves included.
Of that draft class, who were some of the Ladytrons that really kind of did make it along with you? Who are some of the ones who, I guess, we've all heard of?
Well, I think that I don't necessarily. There was a band called Galactica in Spain that were friends of ours, and they did okay down there. But in terms of getting big, I'm not sure whether any did. But there were kind of fellow travelers. For example, in Germany, the scene that we dropped into there was through a lot. They weren't Ladytrons by any description, but they were bands that we would be artists we would be associated with, like Gene's Team and Chicks on Speed. And there was a big record. They weren't, the band were different, but Tokatronic and Consola, there was this scene around that in Germany we were seen as some kind of equivalent. There was that moment, actually, like 99, 2000, 2001, there was this kind of nebulous, undefined, new kind of electro thing. And it was far, far more interesting and exciting than what it became just like a year or 6 months later. As soon as it was defined as Electroclash, right? And this became, it was an effort to commodify all of our work and trademark the genre and profit from everyone else's work. And all the artists involved that we ever spoke to hated the idea of it. But I mean, that scene that existed right before was incredible and so exciting and so colorful. But with hindsight, to be honest, even though we got kind of famous for slagging off Electroclash and saying we're not part of it, because we got put on magazine covers as, here they are, here's the champions of this new thing, Electroclash, and we were stuck in the studio for most of 2002 with no voice and no way of resisting this. And so by the time we came out of the studio, we were so sick of what this thing had become. It was all about how much money was being spent. It was really ostentatious, super capitalist, and we hated it. So the first kind of batch of interviews we did with, like it was a buzz record, that second album, we seemed to spend the whole time distancing ourselves from Electroclash, which is quite amusing when you look back now. But having said that, I do look back and think that moment was amazing, and many of the records were amazing. And the way that it got that music and those ideas out into places where it really had no right to be. It wasn't until we played in when we toured in North America after the second album that you would go to, you'd end up rocking up in places in the Midwest or whatever, and you'd find these kids, and it was their tunnel to this magical world that they perceived to be going on in New York or Berlin or whatever, or London. And so, I started to appreciate it a lot more. I was like, this is, even though we didn't like to be, really just press ganged onto a sinking ship, but with hindsight, it was really quite wonderful. And to be honest, I'm not sure whether anything happened since or whether anything like that will happen again. It was quite a unique moment. So yeah, I've revised my position on Electroclash over the years.
We had Fisher Spooner in New York. They were obviously, one of the kind of, I guess you would say, preeminent Electroclash bands. And I don't think that I don't think that it's necessarily a reflection of the band specifically. It sounds like it's more of an issue with the way a lot of this felt like a product of record labels.
Yeah, it was. I mean, to be honest, I've got some sympathy for Larry T in this. I met Larry T years later again, and he felt like he'd been completely thrown under the bus by all the artists. It was just a lot. It was mostly there was a gravy train there, and he wasn't necessarily the one who was trying to exploit it. I also thought that I was uncomfortable with how the music was annexed by the fashion industry as well. And as soon as I saw that happening, it was just, well, this thing has 6 months maximum. So we've been working on something that, that had an indefinite life, that we'd go on making records forever. And we've been marched onto this sinking ship that's going to be gone in 6 months. So to be fair, we were absolutely within our rights to want to distance ourselves from it. But to be honest, every other artist I spoke to thought the same. Even Miss Kit and people like that. Nobody wanted to had anything to do with the word Electroclash. But that moment, that when that scene didn't have a name, in the 18 months, 2 years before, that was wonderful.
This is worth noting that a lot of those bands didn't survive, and that you're still going.
Yeah, despite, we made that. Other things happened as well. With the third album, which a lot of people think is our best, and in some ways, I agree. We had a torrid time with this. Like our label, we were in quite a safe position because we had a label in North America and a label in the UK and Europe. And what happened if one of the labels went, went down, we still had the other one to fall back on. But the label in the UK, which was, we didn't have the kind of relationship we had with them. The label in the US was amazing, Emperor Norton. That was the best place to be. They understood us, knew where our audience was. They were a small independent label. We were a priority on it. They had money to spend. But the label in the UK was more of like a traditional pop label, and they marketed us as a pop group because they didn't really know what else to do. But they went bankrupt. And then our label, Emperor Norton, in the US got sold. So we were practically left without a label for that third album. It was pretty much orphaned. And the only reason the band survived is because that album was so good. I mean, we realized at this point that we didn't need labels anymore. We went out on the road. Our tours had sell out in minutes. We toured that album for 2 years without any support from a record label behind us. And so, that was to have survived Electroclash and then survived that. I think surviving that was more of a test, to be honest.
You were talking 2005, so
yeah,
Electroclash would have been pretty much dead and buried at that point.
Yeah, that was gone, and then so we were coming back with what should have been it should have been our crossover record, really, but then it was more or less orphaned. But then we went out on the road and we found that we'd carried on growing. And so, it was a strange moment, that third album. I don't even know whether people understand what happened. We tried not to complain about it. We tried to just get on with what we were doing. But I don't know whether people realize how much difficulty. I mean, it almost didn't get made. There was a strong chance that it wouldn't have been finished or released at all.
It's a bad look to spend an entire press tour complaining about your label situation.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's just it's a shame. I mean, sometimes you get drawn into it, but I think now enough time has elapsed to be able to talk about it safely. But there's a hell of a lot of stories, especially around that Electroclash thing, that the people. I think we were uniquely positioned witnesses to that. I think people don't know, and at some point we might write about or document in some way, because it was a very interesting moment.
Yeah, I mean, is there also a sense in which the fact that Electroclash had come and gone, was that also working against you? I mean, was it oversaturated? Had people kind of had their fill?
Well, yeah, it was, by the time that second album came out, it got very delayed, especially in the UK. It came out in the US in reasonably timely fashion, but by the time it came out in the UK, it was Christmas. And there'd already been a backlash against Electroclash in the UK media, and we had to basically face that off. So by the time we put the third record out, it was such a leap. We were taken seriously by people who'd maybe written us off as part of all that, the Electroclash thing. So I ran into Tiger at one point in an event, and he said, "Congratulations." I was like, "Why?" He said, "For surviving Electroclash."
You should have all gotten T-shirts.
Yeah, we survived Electroclash. Well, the whole thing was when we were doing the first, around 2002, because we were a band, it counted against us in a sense. It was like, oh, they're a real band, Electroclash has to be just two people in a project studio. It was almost like we were too authentic to fit in, which, at the same time put us on the indie rock scene, and we were completely inauthentic. This band doesn't even rehearse. They haven't paid their dues. They haven't played in the back of a pub to three people,
which you obviously had. Yeah,
we played in the back room of a pub to three people in Barcelona or something. It was different. But it's like, so we got both sides of this. We never fit in anywhere perfectly, and that's where we wanted to be. The whole idea was we were carving our own space. So if at times we looked aggressive in our, distancing from certain things. It was because of that. We was like, well, we built this thing and it's ours. We don't want to be in anyone else's orbit. We toured. We've rarely opened for anyone. I mean, we did an early tour with Soulwax in the UK. They invited us on their very early days. Other than that, we spent 6 or 7 years. We never opened for any other band. And this was maybe not entirely intentional, but we didn't want to be in anyone else's orbit. I mean, at the end of the second album tour, actually, we got offered a load more stuff. Like we got offered, like, I think the Marilyn Manson World Tour, and turned it down. We wanted to get in the studio and record what would be Witching Hour.
Wait. I have to ask, because obviously that would have been an interesting experience at the very least. Is there a regret? I mean, obviously things didn't end up great for Manson himself, but like, is there a regret of not having leaned into that weirdness?
No, I think I thought that they would hate us. I thought the audience would hate us. I thought it was going to be, we're just going to be abused every night. We're going to have things thrown at us. I didn't think it was going to go well at all. Peaches ended up coming in and doing it in our place, and I think that she didn't have a great time, even though she's far more equipped for this than we are. But the only other time we did, like, Trent Reznor invited us on the Nine Inch Nails, the European tour, but this was sometime later. This was like 2007, and there was some trepidation. We thought, we'd heard horror stories about any band that opened for Depeche Mode had an awful time. It didn't matter who they were. And we thought that it might be like that. And it wasn't. It actually went really well. We picked up like a new audience in Europe with this. We might have had like little pockets of resistance to it that any support band would get, but overall it was super positive. We never got to play with Depeche Mode themselves, unfortunately. We got invited to do it like a stadium tour in Eastern Europe, in the Balkans, like football stadiums. Like we would have done the Levski Stadium in Sofia, where Mira's from, and we were down there ready to join the tour in Athens, and it's when Dave Gahan got very sick, and the whole tour was cancelled, unfortunately. So that was something we wanted to lean into. That was absolutely ideal for us, but despite the warnings we'd had about Depeche Mode audiences, I think that would have worked great, but it wasn't to be. And thankfully, Dave got over his illness,
Specifically in that time that you described before in the recording of the third album, when, again, Electroclash was in the rear view, there were struggles with the labels and everything else. Was there ever a point in the band's history when it wasn't clear that you were going to keep going?
I'd say by that point, it just made us more determined. It was, earlier on in our career, we didn't have a plan. It was like, okay, we've got these songs, so we'll put out a single. Or we've got these other songs, we'll put out an EP. Let's put all this stuff together and make an album. Oh, this has gone well, let's make another album. From the second album, that's the point where it went, okay, well, we're established, and, we have an opportunity here to make the records that we want to. It was definitely clear in our minds. We'd already started making what became Velocifera when all these shenanigans were going on around the third album. So there was never really a sense of, this we've had these problems with labels. Let's just jack it in. No, it made us more determined to carry on, because you can't succumb to that. And also it was that moment when it was becoming apparent that artists could exist without labels as well. That was dawning just at the right moment for us. So we'd seen how the old industry was. We'd seen its collapse. We'd seen this new industry, which was actually temporary. It was assumed to be permanent. And then we got through to 2011, our fifth album, and there was another new industry, another new model, just coming in, and then we took a big long break. We took maybe 7 year break. So that break was longer than intended. There wasn't a sense that, oh, maybe we won't do anything. It was just, the time has to be right. Helen did 2 solo albums. I mean, I produced the first one. So we probably waited a little bit for a second album to be out before we started doing anything with Ladytron again. But yeah, there was never a defeatism or anything like that. It was, because we were still, we were doing well. The tours were getting bigger and bigger. The records were getting weirder. I think actually the break did us good in a way as well, because we were able to hit reset creatively as well. Because I think the first five albums, a certain evolution and autobiographical thread through them. There's an arc to them. Whereas as soon as we'd taken a break, it was like, okay, let's make a Ladytron record. And without really thinking about what had preceded it or thinking about the moment it was in. So I like the idea that we're in this band that exists outside of time.
In preparation for this, I was reading some of the interviews that you did around the self-titled album in 2019. And yeah, you had effectively said, we knew there was going to be a break. We didn't know how long it was going to be. It was unfortunately a little bit longer than we expected. Obviously, if I'm purely just looking down your discography, that belies the situation a little bit, because the technically 8 years between albums that's never the amount of time that a band spends on hiatus, because obviously there's touring after the previous one, and then there's a process of putting the next one together. But there's also, it seems to me that unless you're, I don't know, guided by voices, that it's inevitable that there's going to be a little bit of slowdown in the cadence in which you're putting out records.
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think 2015 is when we started putting the eponymous album together. So we started on our hiatus in 2012. So it really wasn't that long, but it was still longer than we'd thought. But it really wasn't that long. And to be honest, I mean, this record is coming out. This record's coming out 4 years since the eponymous one, but that's obviously completely distorted by the pandemic. I mean, the same way that everyone's chronology has gone out the window now. No one really knows. No one remembers when anything took place. The last 4 or 5 years are all just a blur, aren't they? So, in the same sense with this album, we were recording it 3 years ago. We started recording it 3 years ago, and obviously a stop was put to that after 3 days. We were recording in Mogwai studio in Glasgow, Castle of Doom, and it was just the beginning of March 2020. The first day we were kind of, hold on, this isn't safe. We're not sure, is this right that we're here? Then we took a day off. The next day we were too freaked out and we didn't go in. And then we decided, you know what? We're here. It's safe. We're okay. No one's told us not to do this, so let's just do it. Went and did another day, and some of the tracks that ended up on this album, we got into some partial shape. City of Angels and We Never Went Away. And the studio engineer Tony, he asked me, when's your flight back to Brazil? And I said, oh, it's in about 10 days or something like that. And he said, oh, well, have you not thought about flying back any sooner? For example, tonight. because everything was getting, remember how quickly things were escalating, how much worse everything was by the hour.
We were all kind of on the fence, right? Because like we lived through H1N1, all these other things. And it's not that they weren't issues, but they weren't global pandemics in the way COVID was.
No. I mean, we there was, we'll be okay. There was a certain complacency about it. But we decided then, so you know what, let's just go home. We'll carry on working on music. It won't be a problem. We'll use the time constructively. And Helen picked me up from the studio and, in her car, and we said, we'll go for one last drink before I leave town. I bought the first flight I could get out. And I got into the car and, it was like, a bit drizzly, nighttime, kind of 6, 7 o'clock, already dark there. And Dancing Queen by ABBA was on the radio, and I just froze. It was just the eeriest thing. And I said to Helen, are you getting that? And she's like, yes. Basically, we felt like we were in the first 5 minutes of the movie, when people just didn't know how bad it was going to be.
What was it about that song, though?
It was exactly the kind of music that would be playing in the first 5 minutes of the movie when people don't know. If that movie happened to be about Ladytron in particular.
It's like a bait and switch.
Yes, exactly. So then, we got out and I thought, I'm going to go back home and work on music straight away. I didn't work on anything for ages because I didn't. I found like a creative paralysis because, and other people I spoke to said they had a similar sensation, that we were being told so many different things about what was going to happen. This was an actual, from zombie apocalypse to the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Remember, it was, at one point the pandemic was going to have this huge positive effect. It was going to destroy capitalism. All this was going around. And so I was like, I can't work on music because I've got no idea what world this record is going to be released into. It was so disorientating. And it took me about 6 months to really get back on the train again with writing and producing the record. But again, it's something that none of us can complain about because everyone had it so difficult. Everyone's work was completely affected. But that we also didn't want to make anything that had any connection. We didn't want to make any art that had any connection to what was going on. We thought that those people were doing it were making a mistake because everyone was in the same boat and nobody wanted to think about it. Nobody wanted a concept album about isolation, or you saw all these people making their Facebook lives and everything else. We stayed well away from it all because it was just, look, in a short time, hopefully very short, everyone's just going to want to forget about this. And so we more or less quarantined the album, the writing of the album from any of these influences, even though it definitely left a shadow on the work. It left a shadow on the work for us personally, but we didn't allow any of that dark to seep in. We've got enough dark to work with already. We don't need any more.
You having lived in Brazil for 10 years and I think you had said Italy 5 years before that, and obviously other members of the band are spread out as well. Is there a way in which that long distance collaboration almost prepared you for that moment?
Yes, because we always had to do it this way. It was just that it did become obviously more of a challenge. We maybe none of us, no more than 3 of us ever lived in the same city at the same time. At the very beginning, 3 of us lived in Liverpool. At various moments, 3 of us might have lived in London. People were spread out. The only thing that changed is just that the flights got longer and more expensive whenever we wanted to get together and do something. But yeah, although it did, yeah, you're right, it did prepare us for it. It was incredibly difficult because the rules would change. I mean, I went back to do some recording in Liverpool with Helen, probably late 2020, and it was when it seemed to be returning to vague normality. And I spent Christmas at home, and then on Christmas Eve, Brazil slapped like some kind of emergency order banning all flights and passengers from the UK to Brazil. And the UK isn't really accustomed to this treatment. This is normally what the UK does to other countries. In a way, I was actually quite proud of Brazil for doing it. But it left me stranded. It stranded for about a month before I could go home. Again, not the kind of thing that we'd complain about, because everyone was in I know people in way worse situations than this. They were stranded away from home for 6 months and things like that. But it did make this record take twice as long. Having said that, I think that the record might be better because we had more time to do it, you know.
Living through COVID in Brazil specifically, and having to deal with Bolsonaro and all of his shenanigans, and based on what you said about the end of capitalism, I suspect that we're probably on pretty much the same page about Bolsonaro and Lula.
Yes.
I have to ask though, you know, given, and this is going to date this specific conversation in time, but as we're recording this, you know, that uprising has very recently happened, and you know, this is kind of my U.S. centric view, but you know, and I think rightfully to some degree, comparing it to what happened here on January 6th. Bolsonaro's living in Florida. Lula, thankfully, is still in control. But what's the vibe down there? What's the feeling down there?
It's more one of nuisance than anything else. Those people, they're not serious people. It's like it is the same as the Capitol invasion, because it's based on the Capitol invasion, and he's being advised by Steve Bannon and these other ghouls, you know. It's very much the same thing going on. That was, if nothing else, designed to destroy the positive images that were generated by Lula's inauguration. Whether this was a serious gambit for an overthrow of the government, I don't think so. The government buildings were all empty. They chose a day where there was going to be nobody there. Unless the army came on board with it, there was no way that this was going to result in a government overthrow. So these people are, unfortunately, they created an image, you know, so they win this. They often win in this semiotic war. They create the image of these green and yellow clad people, you know, all over the Congress building. And the impression that they want to give is that one of ungovernability, that Lula cannot govern. There's too many people hate him. There was a few thousand people. You know, you're talking about a few thousand people. The day after in Sao Paulo, all over the country, there was pro-democracy protests, with each of them more people than were in Brasilia smashing up the Congress that day. So I describe it as at the moment, one of nuisance. That's not to say that there wasn't a genuine coup threat. There was until more or less right up to Lula being inaugurated. But the protests that were happening after the election, they never reached critical mass, and the army didn't join them. But they did apparently have a plan, or sectors of the military did have a plan, which they abandoned on November the 30th. So it was a very close thing. You know, they could have intervened. But the other part of it is you don't have a Latin American coup d'etat without the support of the United States. It doesn't happen.
That is a very fair point.
I mean, you know, I mean, this is, I think it was a joke of, I think it was Fidel Castro or somebody said, you know why there's never been a coup in the United States? Because there's no US embassy in the United States. So all I can say is, notwithstanding any reservations about Joe Biden or the state of the Democratic Party or anything like that, it's definitely to the right of political view. It's a centrist party. It's more or less what the Labour Party is in the UK now as well. But I have to say that thank God for Brazil's sake that Trump didn't win re-election, because if Trump had won re-election, Bolsonaro would be in power now. So sometimes you have to be thankful for these things, even though they might not match our expectations of ideological purity.
Another parallel is, I think, similarly, the UK had Corbyn, which is, and we had Bernie here. And I think, they ran a similar flank and ended up in a similar place, unfortunately.
Yeah, they were generational opportunities, but I tried to stay positive about it, that it at least proved what could be done. It proved what, when presented with these policies and these ideas, the electorate does generally respond positive to them. The only way, they'll use any manner of character assassination or anything else to try and destroy them. So this is really what they did to Lula. I mean, Lula, people are very afraid. Anyone talks about rigged elections or anything like that, they're very wary of this kind of language now because of Trump adopting it and Bolsonaro now. But let's be completely realistic. The 2018 election in Brazil was rigged. They threw Lula in jail to stop him running. That's what it was about. This has happened. This was enabled by character assassination for years and years and years in the media of a similar fashion to what happened to Bernie and Jeremy. So I just hope that people are learning from this and that they're coming up with strategies that can sidestep it. There was a hope, really, that I thought with Lula taking power, that these kind of lawfare strategies wouldn't work anymore. That people were too aware of the technique and the strategy. But I'm not convinced. Actually, I think they'll keep trying, because an enormous amount has been invested in this way of waging low-level war against foreign powers and manipulating their politics. So not out of the woods, but I just say, enjoy, go and watch the videos of Lula on New Year's Day at his inauguration, and just enjoy that for the time being. At the moment, all they're trying to do is erase that from memory. So, it's. There's supposed to be. They uncovered another coup plot tonight. Actually, that's the police are out and they're stopping cars and things. So we don't know. In a week's time, I might look tremendously naive, but most of the people I know are still positive that we're going to weather this storm. So
the consequences are more global in the U.S. just because of the kind of outsized power that this country has, but the consequences are dramatically different there because the opposition leader was thrown in jail. It feels like there's a way in which things can go pear-shaped in a major way much more quickly in Brazil.
Yeah, this is part of the reconstruction that's required. There's not just the economy has been sacked, institutions have been damaged, obviously the environment, and social rights and so on. But there's a part of the rebuild is the institutional protection from something like this happening again, and that includes the abuse of the judiciary. There's whole layers of trust need to be rebuilt, and they're doing it. They're well aware of what needs to be done. I actually know Lula personally, by the way, and I'm incredibly proud of him.
Tell him to come on my podcast.
Okay, I'll try my best. No, it's amazing that even when all this stuff was kicking off first, sort of 6 or 7 years ago, when Dilma Rousseff was impeached, it was obvious what was going on there. But I remember thinking, God, these 70-year-old, 80-year-olds are sitting back thinking, do we really have to do this again? Are you depending on us to get you out of this? These people who fought the dictatorship, and them having to put this thing together. And it made me think that my generation, and not just in Brazil, everywhere, we fell into a trap of extreme complacency. Maybe from the 90s onwards, when it felt like everything was permanent, that we've basically done it now. Everything was just going to improve, the end of history and all of that, and I think even if you didn't agree with this, politically, it still felt like there was, a sense of comfort that nothing major was gonna happen to dislodge any of our privileges and even not just in terms of law or social security or just employment, anything, healthcare, anything, culturally as well. I mean, I've watched in Brazil, I've watched them, 4 years or more of like intentional, systematic dismantling of the kind of culture that me and the people I love, live within. The culture war at its most extreme, like just literal physical destruction of progressive culture and its replacement with this reactionary horror. I tell you what, being in Brazil, to cut a long story short, it's taught me a hell of a lot about my own country. I see my own country in very, very different terms. I see things that I hadn't seen before that they're just more obvious here because it's a newer country, I think, and a newer democracy.
We in the U.S. have obviously had our, I guess, as I say, outsized and largely, other than culture, well, even including culturally, but are largely terrible influence. But obviously, yours dates back much further.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I guess the equivalent would be McCarthyism or something like that. I guess that would be the historical parallel. But yeah, these things weren't supposed to happen anymore, were they? And it has been terrifying. But for me, I'm more optimistic now because I feel like we've been through it. And we only have improvement now. So I'm confident that, this artificial astroturf storm can be weathered.